Hello and welcome back to Off the Mats at Walters Jiu Jitsu. Today is a special episode. I am sitting down with Dr. Colin Iwanski from Triangle Sports and Performance Psychology, and we're going to talk about the competitive mindset and what it's like working with one of the most impressionable demographics, the adolescent and youth athlete. So if you are a parent, a coach, or a mentor, to any kids' athletic program, or if you know someone who is, stick around and watch and send this to the people that you know that could benefit from all that Dr. Iwanski has for us today. If you are an adult athlete, or maybe you're a child athlete watching this and you're hitting a mental block, or you just want to raise your performance to the next level, I definitely recommend reaching out to Dr. Iwanski, and I will link his information in the description below. Without further ado, Dr. Iwanski, take it away.
Yeah, so my name is Dr. Colin Iwanski. Y'all can just call me Colin. I am the owner and operator of Triangle Sport and Performance Psychology in the West Raleigh area, and I am a clinical psychologist and a sports psychologist. So my background actually wasn't getting started in sport. I actually kind of like found my way there throughout my career or later on in my career. I started off um, really focused on severe mental illness. So I worked in group homes with individuals with schizophrenia. I did a lot of research on individuals with schizophrenia, which is, um, when you're experiencing delusions and hallucinations. And it ends up being people who are very low on this like functioning spectrum, people who have a really hard time holding down a job, kind of just like navigating the social world, even. And then I think from there, I just got really interested in helping people trying to function at a higher level. And then while I was in grad school at the University of Illinois at Chicago, I started working with the sports psychologist for the Chicago Bears. So going from people who were functioning at like a very, very low level to people who are functioning at just about the highest level as they possibly can in their job, um, like professional athletes. So had this cool opportunity to kind of like really try out working with this different group of people. And I found that to just be super, super fascinating. A very specialty population working with athletes, people who are very motivated to get something done, aren't always motivated to talk about their mental health. I think sometimes there can be some disconnect from like, I want to achieve my goals on the field, but I don't know that I really want to talk about, the challenges in my life off the field. So I find this work with athletes to be super fascinating when you can help them connect, their performance on the field to, their internal mental and psychological and emotional experience. I think some really beautiful things can happen.
So, how long have you been doing like the sports psychology?
Yeah, great question. So, I started working with the Chicago Bears as like the assistant to their sports psychologist. I want to say in like 2017, 2018. I started doing I did some work after that with the sports psychologist for the Chicago Bulls. And then I transitioned into working with some Olympic teams in probably 2018, 2019, where I was the primary performance enhancement kind of consultant and specialist for the US weightlifting team. So I spent a lot of time working with the athletes who eventually went and competed in Tokyo, although that timeline took a little bit longer due to COVID. So I've Yeah, right. Yeah. So I've been doing this work since then. I graduated with my PhD in 2021, and then I've been in private practice since then. So I've been doing this like as my full-time job since 2021. But then I'd had like a lot of experience with it prior to that in grad school.
Oh, for sure. That's really
Yeah.
cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So, do you work with athletes, we'll say of all ages, like teens, like or early adolescence through adulthood, or do you have a specialty?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so I tend to focus most heavily on working with athletes and just high performers in general. Like I consider myself to be like a performance psychologist. So I'll work with people who are, um, you know, highly academic, who are high level professionals, people who are just wanting to improve some part of their functioning, even or like yeah, people who like aspire to be high performers. Um, I work with folks from about age 13, kind of throughout the life spectrum after that. So I work with, I think some of the clients I have right now are like in their 60s and maybe some in their 70s. So I work with kind of people kind of throughout the life development.
That's awesome. So, we obviously do grappling. We offer a wrestling. We have a high level wrestling club as
Very
well
cool.
as jujitsu athletes. That I mean, we have had a 4-year-old win the major kids tournament. Um,
Cool.
so we have, definitely adults and children that compete
Yeah.
as well. Is there one thing that maybe you could say, like, if you're working with kind of that age group or all
Mhm.
ages really, is there something that separates, like as you're
Mm.
coaching adults versus working with the children and the younger, or mentally is the focus kind of the same?
Yeah, wow, what a good question. Yeah, I sometimes I think about it as being the same, like working with adults versus working with kiddos. I think one thing that, that came to mind when you were talking there is like I think that sometimes working with adults versus kids, the like level of insight and like emotional awareness ends up being very different. So like needing to meet the person I'm working with where they're at in regard to like, what is this person's understanding of the world, right? Because your understanding of the world at age 4, for example, I think you mentioned, working with somebody at that age versus like age 60. I mean, those people have just a wealth of different experiences that are influencing what they're thinking and they're feeling when they're competing. So like trying to match like this person's experience of the world based on how old they are um, is important. The other thing that comes to mind is that like I think like at different ages, our goals end up being very different. A lot of times when I'm working with very young athletes. They're like just starting in their sport. So they're not already pros at this thing or they're not already experts at this thing. So, like, really focusing on the idea of like this being a growth experience. And then when you're working with someone who's a little bit older, it might be more on the mastery of this. Like, I'm already really good at this thing. How can I like continue to improve there? So, yeah, so that's a great question. I think like working with adults versus working with children is a different experience. And a lot of it has to do with how much lived experience they have there.
For sure, absolutely. So we have, like I said, the competitive kids, and I feel this could translate really to any sport where
Mhm,
you have kids at a young age that
mhm.
we'll say we'll maybe separate it.
Sure.
One that you think that the child should compete. I compete myself. Um, I don't know why. It's not my favorite thing to do, but I think just the challenge. But I see for like a grappling based tournament, you should do it twice. First
Mm,
time, zero expectations. You have
love
no
that.
idea what's going to happen, what's going to
Sure.
go on. And then the second time, now that you have some experience and
Yeah.
what to expect, now you can really try to do something. Right?
Yeah.
Like, so for me, and I also like coach the kids, help coach the kids class at our gym. When we're looking at talking with parents about competing, they're seeing it as like, well, about just losing, and if the kid loses or doesn't do well, then they're going to be disinterested, and it'll be,
Mm.
so what are your thoughts with that? Like how could you tell the parents, like, it's a great lesson, right? There's so much about perseverance and about
Yes.
just really staying active. And if you never want to compete again, that's fine. But just for that experience that, hey, I fell off the bike, but I'm gonna get back on. I'm gonna keep training. And if I don't want to
Yeah.
compete, that's totally fine. What are your thoughts
I
about it?
I love that notion of like if the child wants to compete, let them choose to compete, and if they don't want to, I think that that is absolutely totally okay too, right? I have worked with so many kiddos who at some point were like, this sounds awesome because, they're an excited, passionate young person who's like, yeah, of course I want to be a pro soccer player. Of course I want to be a pro insert sport there. And then at some point, 6 months into their sport, they're like, actually, I want to be a pro this other thing. Kids have that tendency to change those dreams. I have had a number of dreams in my life that didn't pan out, including wanting to be a building when I was 6 years old. And I'm really glad that my mom didn't continue to push me to be a building because I think I would have experienced a very challenging life. So, one thing that I talk to parents about when we are thinking about competition is like, let them choose to do it, but also let them choose not to. Competition takes a ton of time, money, energy from parents, logistical coordination. And if the motivation to compete isn't coming from the kid, I think parents end up pushing a lot, which ends up leading the kid to burnout or someone resenting someone else. I have seen kids end up resenting their parents for pushing too hard. I have unfortunately also seen parents end up, feeling some level of resentment for their kiddo for not putting in as much effort because at some point that kid decided, I just don't want to do this anymore. So like instead of kind of like deciding for them, I think helping kids decide or helping kids understand maybe what they're signing up for when they're competing by like asking helpful questions. Hey, what makes you want to compete? What sounds fun about this? What do you hope to get out of competition? So like this gets this person kind of thinking about this. This isn't like a fact check of like, do they know what they're into? But it's helping them build ownership of like, well, what makes you want to do this? Because I think competition introduces kids to a lot of things that they like may not immediately be prepared for, and that's okay, right? A big part of sports is like facing a challenge that you're not ready for, failing, and then learning to overcome it. And I think that's actually I want to talk a little bit about why I think we do youth sports to begin with, and I think that's a big part of it. But I think competition introduces kids to things that they're not immediately prepared for. Public failure, comparison to other people, which is not something that a lot of kids want. A lot of pressure. I think kids are under more pressure right now to do well in sports and academics than they ever have been. And also a huge tying of identity to performance. And if we skip this conversation about what competition is for, I think parents end up getting kind of surprised when their kid shuts down after a loss or when they say they don't want to compete anymore after, a parent just signed them up for like a year-long commitment to something. Because I think parents have that ability to be like, yes, I want to do this for a year. I'm ready to sign up for this thing. But like a year in a kid's life is could feel forever long. So like they may not really understand when their parents signing them up for a year long commitment. That's a big thing. And I I want to take a second to talk about what I think youth sports is for, because I think that there's this huge push that like youth sports needs to lead to a very specific place, a D1 like college position, or it needs to lead to them going to the Olympics, or it needs to lead to them becoming a pro in the sport that they do. I, and I want to be honest here, if the goal of youth sports is scholarship or competing in college, or going to the Olympics or being a professional, then I think this is a terrible return on investment. Like, absolutely talk to your financial advisor. This is a bad idea. Spend your money somewhere else if that's your ultimate goal. Um, the NCAA says that 2% of high school athletes will compete at the D1 level. 2%. That is 2 out of 100 high school athletes. Um, and only about half of them actually get any amount of money to go compete at that level. And if we're talking about Olympic athletes, oh my gosh, the numbers are even smaller. The chances of being an Olympian, let alone winning any sort of medal, is astronomical. You probably have a better chance of getting struck by lightning. So I think that that's actually not terrifying. I think it just actually clarifies why we do youth sports. I think youth sports isn't about, you know, necessarily becoming an Olympian or going pro or playing in college. I think youth sports helps us learn a love of effort. I think it helps young kiddos learn to regulate their emotions better, helps them learn to work together and cooperate to like achieve team goals in a lot of sports, helps them learn to respond to success and failure in healthier ways, helps them also stay fit and healthy, right? Like, let's not forget that's a huge part of why we do sports versus other competitions, and also helps them build this like lifelong, beautiful relationship with challenge, where they learn how to approach challenge in healthy ways. And I oftentimes want to help parents maybe think about their child in sports as, and maybe their goals for their child in sports as, the goal isn't just to raise a successful athlete, especially at like age 12, right? Because if your kid's peaking at 12, then like, well, they got a long road ahead of them of challenge. I think it's to raise a healthy, independent adult who can handle success and failure. And I think if you do that second thing, high performance likely is going to follow that. So, sorry, that was a really long answer
No,
to your
I no,
question.
I really yeah, I love all of that, like, I think that's yes.
Cool.
It
Yeah.
should definitely be the purpose of kids sports. I was actually talking,
Yeah.
to someone the other day, and I was like, "Man, like, when did" because jujitsu or even wrestling will say, but I we could focus on high school,
Yeah. Hmm.
as well, like, when did it become, like, the banners and the graphics, like,
Yes.
advertising
Mm.
the child, like, "Oh,"
Yeah.
like, we're almost marketing that, "Hey, like, little Susie is a great fit for your volleyball like, it's just I was like,
Yes.
it's almost becoming disgusting, like
We're branding, like, there's some level of, like, this personal brand of, like, "Oh, yeah, exactly, like, little Susie's this great volleyball player, you want her on your team." Yeah, it's tough. I can't imagine, like, I have the thought that social media might have something to do with this a little bit, or at least maybe exacerbating something that maybe was already there, perhaps. Yeah.
yes. So, with that being said,
Yeah.
um, all of the we'll say the branding, the marketing of the child,
Sure.
how would you what if we're getting into, like, the high schoolish age, right?
Sure.
And you have a someone whose accomplishments their parents just keep putting up there,
Sure.
how to know if they are we'll say really serious. Like my son, he's 13. He has a very firm goal. He's like, I want to win the high level tournament. He
Cool.
works really hard and
Mhm.
he has accomplishments that he wants to achieve. I'm
Yeah.
always cautious, like, are you sure that you want to do this? Like, if you don't ever want to compete again, like I'm fine with that. Like it has to be your
Yeah.
dream, not mine.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of navigate whether it's the child who's really wanting to compete, really wanting to do that, really wanting to move to that high level, right?
Yeah.
Versus I really just love like that my video is getting like all these likes and
Mhm.
comments and I'm getting all the attention from my parents or friends or whatever.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of a tricky place to be.
It's a really, first off, that's like $1 million question, and if I knew the if I could answer that with some certainty here, I think my job would be a lot easier. So it's a great question, and it's something that I am trying to figure out with clients. One thing that I have noticed is that I will sometimes ask people, "Hey, why do you do your sport, and what do you like about it?" And I noticed that some a lot of folks I work with, just a lot of people in general, will say things about like their sport specifically. I enjoy um, like like the footwork involved in my sport. Like I like how strong I feel when I do my sport. Like I love the tactics involved in my sport. And then sometimes I notice folks saying like I like winning. I like when people say that I'm good at something, which I think speaks more to like, maybe this sport is serving this other function in their life versus just like, I like doing the sport because the sport is fun and it's cool. And, I get to be with my buddies. And it's more about like, there's something maybe like missing in my life and sports is filling this hole in. It is hard to know whether or not, um, when someone says, "Hey, my goal is to be this great Olympian," where that goal comes from. Sometimes it is truly just from the child, right? Parents have a huge influence on their child's life, but maybe that goal truly is just from them. But it's hard to disentangle that because kids are so influenced um, by their parents. I mean, they're like the original. I mean, if we were talking about social media again, like they're the original influencers, right? They're the only person. You're the only person on your kid's feed for most of their life, and then eventually some new people get added in there, and there's some like differences of opinions and things like that. But for a long time, parents and coaches to some extent are the people that have this tremendous impact on like how this person thinks about the world, which is cool, right? Like there's a lot of like power that you have over like helping your child become this wonderful human being. It's also a lot of responsibility. So I think that that is something that like I love parents to be aware of is like your child is watching what you do, listening to what you say all the time, right? They may not always acknowledge it. They may not always do what you want, but they are paying attention to what you do. And they oftentimes end up modeling the things that you do and don't do later on in life. Um, yeah. And I can think about some examples of that. I just had a child about 2 years ago. He's 19 months old now. Um, and the other day, I caught myself doing something. I threw a book to the floor, and that's not how I treat books. But this was a board book. I was like, it'll be fine. Yeah. And then about 2 hours later, I saw my son throw a book to the floor, and I was like, oh, he watched me do that, and now he's learning that's what you do with books. And now I'm having to go back and try to think about like, okay, I need to be cautious with modeling the behavior I want my child to engage in, which I think ends up being an important part for parents to think about later on when it comes to sports. How you talk about, think about, how you act when your child wins and when your child loses has a huge impact on how they think about winning and losing. If you're if you get unbelievably excited when your child wins and you express like coldness and disappointment when they lose, your kid learns one, I've got a huge control over how my parent feels, but also they learn winning is good, losing is bad. And it's not as much focused on, okay, what can I do to, improve my chances of winning? It's focused on how can I not feel this bad when I lose. So just a couple things to keep in mind there, or like a couple thoughts that were going through my head as you were talking about that. I think that parents have this huge impact on the human being that their children end up becoming, which is awesome, but also it's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, it really is. So much responsibility.
So
So,
much.
what would you say to parents who maybe they have a child who they're very motivated for whatever
Yeah,
reason, right? Like
sure.
we can't determine
Can't really.
why,
Yep.
but like what's borderline like supporting them, giving them the
Mm,
opportunity
okay.
versus like now we're pushing too hard.
Gotcha. Yeah. So maybe a couple thoughts I would have here. Yeah. Let me talk a little bit about like maybe some ways that parents can support, but also maybe some like yellow or red flags to pay attention to of like, hey, if you're noticing this may be a time where something's going on here. So I think like one thing that I see parents do that I think can muddy the waters is sometimes their role in their child's athletics gets confusing. I think separating roles of parent versus coach is really important, and I think this breaks down a lot. I think sometimes, it, in like an ideal world, I think coach is there for instruction, and parents are there for like emotional support. Um, After a competition, I would want coaches and parents to just be like a good teammate, but like especially for parents, I don't think kiddos need another like a second coach um, after a competition, especially a tough one. Because I think if a kid gets um, after a loss, especially if a kid gets coaching from the coach, coaching from the parent, I think they're going to get disappointment from themselves. I think it ends up being too much. Um, so I think that trying to avoid those post game press conferences, right? The dreaded car ride home is something I hear about from my clients a lot where, man, I had a bad game or a bad performance or whatever. Um, I am anxious about the mistake I just made, not just because my team might lose because of it, but because I know that I'm about to have a really long, hard conversation with mom or dad about this thing. And I think that those conversations actually get in the way of that child's best performance because this kid is now thinking about, oh my gosh, I made a mistake. What is mom and dad going to say after this? So something to keep in mind there. I think those post post game car ride home conversations um, may not be leading to the helpful impact that I think a lot of parents want them to have. Some other things to keep in mind. I think trying to focus on regulating our emotions first um, gives our child a good way to model how to regulate their emotions. Because I think they don't just experience competition throughout the match, they experience it through their parents and coaches' reactions. Um, if you notice that your kiddo is looking up at you in the stands every time they make a mistake or do something good, then you might be someone who is a part of this challenge, or your kid's looking for your reaction a lot. Um, if you're experiencing tension or expressing tension, if you're visibly disappointed or frustrated after their performance, they're feeling that. These kids are running like emotion detection software in their brain that would put AI to shame. So even if you're like, I'm being totally discreet about how I'm feeling, they're picking up on it. They can read like micro expressions with the best of them. Um, we want to try to shift focus from, I loved that you won today, or wow, I loved how well you played today, to like, I loved watching you compete. I thought it was really cool that you tried during the bout. Um, these kids really don't need a post game press conference as much as we think. Some ways that we can be like really supportive in like a more like a positive way would be being really specific with our praise, saying things like, hey, you played well today, doesn't stick very well. But if you can label a specific behavior, action they did, technique shift that they used, some composure they expressed, like, wow, I loved how you kept working when you were stuck there. I love that you stay composed even after, they got up on you in the bout. That really builds confidence under pressure. So those are a couple of those things there. Some like big don'ts to do, like if you're noticing like I want to make sure that I'm not doing anything that's going to get in the way of my kids' sports. Some things to avoid: sideline coaching, kind of like what I was mentioning before. If your kid is constantly looking up at you in the stands, it may already be too much. Um, I have heard a lot of people, a lot of kiddos talk about the anxiety they have about their sport because they can hear mom or dad yelling at them from the sidelines. I think that while that instruction may be intended to be helpful, it may not actually be leading to better performance. So keeping in mind, like, even if your goal or intention is good, we want to think about the actual impact and outcome it's having. Is giving this much instruction during the bout actually leading someone to perform better? So keeping that in mind. Again, I talked about those car ride breakdowns. Definitely want to discourage those. I think it makes mistakes feel a lot better. And timing is really important when you do want to have a conversation with your kiddo. Right after the bout, not a great time for like immediate analysis. Thinking about the difference between adults and kids, um, kids oftentimes are living and experiencing those emotions much bigger than adults, right? So if you're trying to talk to them when they're feeling really big emotions, man, that like logic side of their brain, the part of their brain that's able to like take in information, manipulate it, do something with it, is not going to be functioning at its best. So timing those conversations is really important. Um, we also want to try to shift our focus away from the outcome to the process. So if we're constantly talking about wins, medals, and rankings, you can bet that they will be too. And I tend to find that that leads to greater anxiety, a bigger fear of mistakes, and a lot of burnout for these kiddos. Um, yeah, and those are some of the big ones I tend to find help. I think also overdoing it too early. There is a big push in youth sports right now to try to get kids involved and specialize with a single sport earlier than there ever has been, in regard to athletics. So for a long time, especially including with my generation and in generations earlier, um, you would oftentimes do multiple sports, um, maybe like a different sport in different seasons up until high school, where you would then probably specialize in like one, maybe two sports. Um, that has some cool benefits, but one of the consequences of specializing too early is we're seeing more career ending injuries than we ever have before, in part because we are like hyper focusing on very specific movements in a sport. Like if you're just doing one sport um, all year long for 12 straight years, and again, think about, you got a child's body here, you're not an adult. You're much more likely to have an overuse injury, which can lead you to be way out of your sport for a long time. Doing multiple sports and different sports leads you to strengthen different parts of your body and not focus on one movement as much over and over again, which decreases the likelihood of those of those overuse injuries.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, some fascinating stuff there. Sports is cool. Big fan.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think it's a valuable, there's a lot of valuable lessons. Like you
Absolutely.
said, like more than just like staying fit, like of course being active and healthy are great, but like man, just the
Right.
resilience and
Yes.
how to deal with failure. And I feel like you might speak
Yes.
differently as a professional. Like it is a skill that is so super necessary.
Oh my gosh, it is like life's learning curriculum. Failure is what leads people to later succeed, and learning to tolerate failure and use it as like a stepping stone for later success, I think is so important. So like normalizing you will fail and that's okay. That's how we learn. Like I love that. I'm not sure where I heard it, but this idea of like y- you win or you learn idea of saying like, hey, failure is inevitable in the sport and it's actually good for you because we learn more in those moments. So yeah, no, I love that.
Well, thank you so much. I don't want to keep you any longer, but man,
Sure.
that was
Yeah.
so insightful. And yeah, what a lot of interesting information, a lot of good things, I think, for parents. And I think the same thoughts could apply to coaches, right? Like
I think a lot to, oh yeah, a lot of cases. Yeah.
just how to kind of remember that they do feel things bigger because their life
Yeah.
experience and handling the emotions is less than us as an adult. Um,
Great point, right? Yeah, absolutely. Well, Katie, it was great chatting with you today. Thank you so much for having me on your program.